Hey, what is going on, guys? We're back at it again with another video today. And today we're going to be discussing the steps that it takes to become a practicing physician in Colombia and the steps to become a practicing physician in the United States. So let's go ahead and start with how to become a physician in Colombia. Let's start off with going back all the way to high school. So there's obviously that high school education, which in Colombia usually lasts about 11 years. From when you start your first grade in elementary school, right? Typically, you know that in the US, it's usually 12 years, but most schools here in Colombia last 11 years. However, if you go to an international school or a school that gives you a US high school diploma outside of the United States, well, that's gonna last the normal 12 years that it does in the US. Regardless of that, either during your 11th grade or during your 12th grade, you're supposed to take this standardized college entrance exam called the ICFES, which basically tests you on a bunch of knowledge from stuff you've learned during your years in high school. It's a test comprised of 188 questions. It has 5 sections, and each section is scored out of 100. Those sections typically include math, critical reading, social sciences and ethics, natural sciences, as well as English. And so each of those sections, each of the 5 sections is scored out of 100 for a total score of 500. And the typical score, I think the median score in Colombia is about a 250. And the reason for that, why it's so low usually, it's because there's a big disparity between different high schools all over the country, where the poorest areas will perform poorly because they don't really have the best access to education. Typically, these areas are the ones that are the furthest away from the center of the country, where you have the biggest cities like Bogota, Medellin, Cali, Pereira, right? But like cities in the Amazon rainforest and in like departments that are further away from the middle of the country, the scores are typically lower because these students don't have the best access to education compared to students that live in the cities. So the exam, as I said, has a total of 188 questions, and it usually takes about a day. When I took it back in 12th grade of high school, it was about 4.5 hour blocks with like a time to actually leave the place and go get lunch and come back. And so the way that you apply to colleges or universities in Colombia is usually not you go straight into the career that you want to do. So if you want to practice medicine, you go straight into medical school. If you want to practice law, you go straight into law school. If you want to be an architect, you go straight into architecture school, and so on. There's the concept of majors that works in the United States does not work in Colombia. You literally just go into this career that prepares you both in the theoretic as well as the practical sense for whatever that pathway that you decide to take is. So that's essentially how it works. So at the end of those high school years, you put together your ICFES score, maybe a few essays, and then some interviews, and you go into the career, into the university you want to go. So for medical school specifically, there's usually the ICFES, a couple of essays, and also the necessity to have some interviews. However, the way that it works in the US with like that preliminary filter is different. That initial filter to get an interview is not as hard as it is in the US, but they do require interviews here, as in like there's both like a behavioral component as well as like a more normal interview. So the MD program in Colombia is comprised of it's a 6.5 year program. It's essentially 13 semesters. The first 5 semesters are typically preclinical, and the rest include rotations and clinical involvement. The final 12th and 13th semesters are part of the internship year, or what you do as your first year in residency in the United States, where you essentially work as a doctor at the hospital in preparation for the beginning of residency. So at the end of those 13 semesters, you graduate as a general physician, and you're able to practice medicine as a primary care doctor. So that's a big difference with the way it works in the United States, where there is no general physician in the United States because, or at least there is now the concept of médico general that we have in Colombia does not exist in the US, because all US doctors have gone through residency, be that like family medicine or internal medicine to go into primary care or whatever other specialty that doctor decides to pursue. Now, just to put it into context as well, the average primary care doctor in Colombia makes about $870 per month, for a total of about $11,000 per year. So again, that's just like a big comparison there to the amount that a doctor makes in Colombia compared to the amount that a doctor makes in the United States. So I just wanted to point that out as well. Now, getting into a residency program in Colombia is really competitive because there's a surplus of general physicians graduating from medical school compared to the number of residency positions available in all of the country. So to put it into context, there's about 800 residency spots in all the various specialties that open up every year for doctors in Colombia. However, medical schools push out about 3,500 newly graduating physicians per year. That leaves many physicians without a residency position. So what that does eventually is that there is a surplus of general physicians or general practicing physicians in Colombia. And that has led to, there's such a big supply of general physicians in this country of Colombia, then most of them are not paid really well because they can be replaced easily. That's like one of the ways in which that situation can be thought about. So that's how you do the residency thing. Now, how do you get into a specialty program in Colombia? So to be admitted into the residency program, the newly graduated doctor presents to different universities within Colombia by providing some essays, grades from medical school, recommendation letters, and performance on institution-specific examinations, medical specialty tests on general practice knowledge. So if you're going into your first specialty program, you take this test that is specific to every university you're applying to or every hospital you're applying to, that tests you on general medicine knowledge. There's not a standardized test such as the steps that you take in the United States. So based on the results of all of those components, you can get admitted into residency. However, this is very anecdotal experience from my father being a physician in Colombia, as well as having been able to talk to many of his friends, many of his colleagues. The process to get into a residency program in Colombia is quite biased. If you don't know the right people, if you don't have a network of people that you know within the universities or the hospitals that you're applying for that specialty program into, then it gets really hard to actually be admitted because there's a lot of influence that is not caught by the application systems. So if someone inside the system already is like, oh, you should take this doctor because I've heard about him, or you should take this doctor because I've heard about him, all of that plays a really big role into how you get accepted or you don't. And again, I'm not exactly sure how prevalent this is, but this is just from anecdotes that I've heard. So Colombian medical residents used to not be paid by the training institution until the year 2016. Now, regardless of the training program, every Colombian resident is required to be paid 3 monthly minimum legal salaries on a monthly basis. However, residents also have to pay a semesterly tuition to the institutional training program. So that's another big difference with the system in the United States, and actually one of the biggest downfalls of medical training paths in Colombia. And that is residents pay the institution for their training during residency. Whereas that does not happen in the US, where you are paid and you don't have to pay that institution. Before 2016, like I just said, physicians were not paid for residencies in Colombia, and they actually had to still pay the institution for their training. So to put it in context, let's look specifically at an internal medicine residency in Universidad de la Sabana in Bogotá. So it is a 3-year program with a total investment over the 3 years of about $29,948. That's about $5,000 for each of the 6 semesters that the program lasts. Assuming the doctor is only getting paid through the resident's salary over the period of 6 months, that doctor is making only about $4,300 over a period of 6 months, and the tuition is about $5,000. Now, that means the physician might actually need an extra source of income, an extra family support, a Patreon that can help get that person through their training, right? Or maybe they have, savings that could get through that. But essentially, it's not enough to even pay for your groceries, for living expenses, for housing, and for, any other things that a person might need to have basic sustenance. So that again is one of the biggest downfalls, because just the math does not add up. You have to pay $5,000 and you're only making $4,300. So you need extra money and you need extra support to even live in that city where you're getting the training, while you actually have to still pay that institution. And even though we're on a route to improvement in this country, because in 2016 those residents started to get paid, there's still a lot to be done, because if you look at these numbers, for this example at Universidad de la Sabana, internal medicine residency would be very expensive for anyone that doesn't have outside support. So even though since 2016 there is now a resident salary by law, doctors with enough savings, resources, or sponsoring parties are technically the only ones able to afford postgraduate medical education. Now, we're done with the way you become a doctor in Colombia. So just to recap, ICFES to get into university or medical school, go through the 6.5 years, 13 semesters, and do your intern year at the end of that, and also be able to apply into those residency programs or practice as a general physician in Colombia. So that's essentially the process. Not many standardized hurdles within the medical school training program, as there are many, as we may know, in the United States. So let's jump into how it works in the United States. So that's part 2 here. So essentially, high school grades as well as SAT are essential components of your admission into college to pursue a pre-medical preparation that lasts 4 years. The platform that is typically used to apply to colleges in the US is the Common Application, which includes a personal statement, some small essays, high school grades, and SAT score. This Common App is sent to all the colleges you apply to, and then they send back supplemental applications that you fill out as you apply. And this is a process that typically occurs during 12th grade, maybe end of 11th grade. And it's the way that you can get into that first initial college program. The school then sends back a decision to you once all the information is holistically reviewed. Most colleges in the United States claim to have a holistic review of your application that is not solely based on your SAT score, but it includes your grades from high school, includes recommendation letters, the way you can tell your story, the way you can talk about your failures, the way you can talk about growth, right? All of that is taken into account. Now, a little bit about the SAT. It's an exam with 2 sections, one on English, whether that be grammar, reading comprehension, I think both of those, and one on math, which tests on like algebra as well as many other topics that you learn in high school, but nothing like calculus or anything like that. And each section is scored out of 800 points for a total of 1,600 points, and that's essentially how you apply to college in terms of demonstrating academic competency. That typical competitive scores usually range between 1,300 and 1,600. Obviously, if you look at the averages for schools like Harvard, Yale, Columbia, not medical school, sorry, just college, they typically have very high SAT scores because they're such a competitive program to get into, since they have such a surplus of applicants every year. So once admitted into a university, you attend it and major in anything you want to, as long as you take the pre-med requirements that are established by the medical schools that you will apply to after completing the 4-year pre-medical program. Pre-med classes include biology, chemistry, organic chemistry, physics, calculus, biochemistry, cell biology, physiology, microbiology, etc. Right? And so nearing the end of your 3rd year, the pre-med program, you start applying to medical schools. Of your pre-med program, you start applying to medical schools to be admitted during the spring of your 4th year or by the summer post-graduation. In addition to coursework, pre-meds need to accrue clinical experience, volunteer work, research experience, as well as leadership positions. So all of these aspects are taken together as a whole. Your grades from college, the fact that you complete all those pre-med requirements, your MCAT score, and all of these experiences to prove that essentially you have explored what it means to be a physician, what the medical profession entails, and that you know what you're essentially getting yourself into. So all of that is taken together as a whole. Now, a little bit about the MCAT exam. There's also the necessity to take that entrance exam called the MCAT. and it's scored between 472 and 528, and tests on all the knowledge learned during the pre-med experience, right? So essentially what that tests you on is chemistry, organic chemistry, physics, both 1 and 2, biology, biochemistry. It tests you on some statistics concepts as well, and then psychology, sociology, and critical analysis and reading skills as well. So at the end of the 4 years of undergraduate experience, you graduate with a BA or BS, or if you went down a 2-year community college, you might also need to complete extra years to jump from that associate's degree into a bachelor's degree. Either that's Bachelor of Arts or Bachelor of Sciences, doesn't matter. Both can help you get admitted into medical school. So another big difference between the two systems: medical school is a postgraduate program in the United States. Medical school is an undergraduate program in Colombia, right? One needs a preliminary undergraduate degree, the other doesn't, or is itself an undergraduate degree, right? So then you go to medical school, and medical school is a 4-year program in the United States, and it's comprised of 2 preclinical years and 2 clinical years. That paradigm is slowly shifting to less preclinical years, so less time to essentially kind of learn the theory, or just crunched into a smaller amount of time. There's typically like 1.5 year preclinical years now, or 1 year preclinical years. And medical schools are slowly shifting to add a research year, and that's why they're trying to minimize those preclinical years. But I think that it's actually kind of necessary to have enough time to learn all the theory, because as we know, there's a lot of theory to be learned in medicine. And I think 2 years is still kind of short, but it's plenty of time to learn that. But then when it's shrunk to 1.5 or 1 year, then I think it gets a little harder, and that's just to fit in a research year, which is to make you more competitive for residency programs as well, right? At the end of your 2nd year, you take a licensing exam called the Step 1. And at the end of your 3rd year, you take another licensing exam called Step 2 CK. CK standing for clinical knowledge. Step 1 tests you on essentially all of those details of medicine from more like a theory perspective, like a more conceptual knowledge about medicine in general. It tests you on all of that. And then Step 2 CK is more clinically relevant, where it's more like how do you treat, how do you diagnose, and all of that stuff. These 2 exams, in addition to research experiences, leadership positions, shadowing, networking, and volunteering, will be your main components when applying to residency programs. During the summer between 3rd and 4th year of medical school, you start applying to residency programs and enter what is called the match. And the way the system works is essentially, and I got this from like a very useful video online, it's the way the system works in broad terms is that you send all your application materials to all the programs you apply to, and some of them will call upon you to go interview. You will then be given the opportunity to rank the programs that you interviewed at in order of preference. The programs themselves are then given the opportunity to rank the applicants they interviewed. Then an algorithm is run that matches the applicants to a program based on both higher preference of the applicant as well as the highest ranked in the program. So it matches you with the hospital that ranked you the highest and that you also ranked the highest. So kind of matching both of those things. And that's essentially how that match works. So it's not necessarily like a full decision you have. There is a lot of decisions that essentially it's just trying to match both the way you think and the way the hospital's thought of you. Residency training programs are treated like jobs in the United States because residents are not required to pay the training institution for the training years. In fact, residency training programs pay the residents for their work between $60,000 and $80,000 per year. The key distinction between these two systems, Colombia and the United States, in terms of medical training is the number of filters to become a U.S. physician, right? The discrepancies in compensation between the two systems, as well as the overall length of training. So to put it in context, to have the MD degree in Colombia, you need 6.5 years, 7, depending on how long you take. To have the MD degree in the United States, you need at least 8 years, right? Depending on how long you take with your undergraduate, because there's both traditional as well as non-traditional paths, and that's perfectly fine. And then there's a difference between the fact that a general physician can practice in Colombia without having a specialty, without being an internist or a family doctor, just right after medical school. And that in the United States, there must be more training after completing that MD degree. Essentially, that you need to be a specialist, whether that's in family medicine or internal medicine, to even practice medicine, right? The other distinction, resident salaries. They exist in Colombia, but you also have to pay the institution while you're training as a resident. In the United States, there are resident salaries significantly higher, and you don't have to pay the institution that you're training at. So again, big distinction that you can also start growing economically, have like long-term plans in terms of your finances. And in Colombia, if you don't have the right background, it's gonna be really hard to grow financially during those years that you're still in training, or you might have to go into debt. Another big difference, I guess I'll point it out here, is the cost of getting that MD degree. Very expensive in the US, if not financed by financial aid, scholarships, and whatnot, right? Typical average debt of MD graduates in the United States is around $200,000 for the 4 years of training, without counting whatever debt they have from undergrad. So it's very expensive, right? In Colombia, it's not as expensive, but it depends on which school you attend. If you go to a public school, the amount you pay is based on your parents' income. So it's more standardized or compared to how much your parents are able to pay or help you out with that. And there's actually like less debt to become a doctor in Colombia, but it can also still be really hard. It depends, and you go to a private school, and typically like the biggest and most expensive private schools are in Bogota. Universidad de los Andes, they have really expensive semesters, typically 24 million Colombian pesos, which I'm not sure what that translates to into US dollars, but I can put it in the video. So I hope this video was useful in kind of understanding the way these two systems work, how you move through the different hurdles, what it takes to become medical professional in Colombia, and what it takes to become a medical professional in the United States. Let me know in the comments below what other things you'd like to see in my next video, and I hope you enjoy.